Hey friends, thanks so much for tuning in. We've got a jam-packed broadcast for you here. We've got the head of research, Mark O'Byrne from goldcore.com on the line, and our contributor, producer, and friend, Rory. Mark, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me on. It's been too long. I'm trying to think. It's been a good few months.
Yeah, it's been several months, and so much has happened since you've last been on. Let's check in with Rory for a hello. How you doing, Rory?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you for having me.
Well, lots to cover. We're glad you're here. And what I wanted to do, gentlemen, is start with a headline we rarely see. And it's this one, which I haven't written yet. Strong dollar keeps gold prices low for Americans. And the reason I'm saying that is because according to your own blog at goldcore.com, Mark, gold is up 14.3% in Japanese yen this year, 12.3% in euros, 5.8% in the British pound, and of course only 0.4% when priced in dollars. And that's the real story, isn't it? Gold continues to be real money and to act as real money around the globe as fiat currencies are printed and annihilated.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it speaks to the whole very sort of dollar-centric nature of the world today. We all look at things in dollars, not just in America. Obviously you guys do that naturally enough, but throughout the world, in the Western world, particularly in the investment and finance sphere, the dollar is still king, and everything is looked at in terms of pricing in dollars, you know. So and that's created a perception that that the gold has been weak this year when it's been anything but it's actually, as we point out in the research, it's slightly higher in dollar terms year to date 2014. So you know, it's performed quite well vis-a-vis other things. Obviously not performed as well as stock markets, which have roared ahead again, but it's performed very well in all the major other fiat currencies, and I think what we're seeing in terms of yen and in terms of euro and the pounds to an extent is a precursor to what we will see in terms of dollar probably next year, I would think, you know. And I think this year is a year of, we had the falls in 2013. I think we're seeing a consolidation, we're seeing a bottoming out process, and it's also a function of obviously manipulation. We might talk about that in the course of the interview, but and it's not just the major fiat currencies, so that it's very strong in yen, and they're debasing the yen in a huge way, obviously, and euros. They haven't even started debasing the euro yet, and there's talk that Draghi's going to start that in 2015, but it's up 12% in euro terms without them even starting QE in the eurozone. But even more importantly, if you look to Russia and Ukraine and Syria and countries like that, their currencies are being devalued in a very, very significant way, and gold has gone up 30, 40, 50% in these currencies. So it shows again, gold is a safe haven asset. It's money. It has been throughout history. It is today, and it just completely it makes a mockery of the idiotic and simplistic anti-gold. I actually think it's propaganda in effect. The stuff that's come out recently, Willem Buiter from Citibank and other people, the guy Barry Ritholtz, who's a very prominent blogger now and gets picked up, has quite a pulpit on Bloomberg, and these guys are coming out and they're attacking gold in quite a serious way and saying that it's a 6,000-year-old bubble and just a whole host of silly things. I mean, even the 6,000-year-old bubble thing is just ridiculous, because there were no bubbles 6,000 years ago. There was no bubble 5,000 years ago, 4,000, 3,000, 2,000 years ago, because there weren't markets. We've only had bubbles since the big bubbles, particularly since the Federal Reserve in 1913, and particularly since Nixon went off the gold standard in 1971. That's what's creating really big bubbles, you know. So there was no bubbles. 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, you know. So it speaks to that, and I think it's important for people to realize that and just to stay focused on that, because I think there's a lot of propaganda that shakes people out, and we've had some clients selling in recent months, and we tell them it's not our interest to tell them not to sell, because if they sell, obviously, you know, as a dealer, we make money when people buy and sell. But we've always said if we do the right thing by our clients, we give them good advice, we tell them to hold for the long term, to own gold as financial insurance, we believe that they will appreciate that, and you know, we get good word of mouth, and they tell their friends and family, and it's doing the right thing by your client as well, you know.
That's right, and we try to do the right thing by our listeners, and you read my mind when you mentioned propaganda, because that's exactly what it is, and that's why I wanted to lead with these facts that when priced in other currencies around the world, gold is up a lot this year. Now, what we hear from the mainstream mockingbird corporate media in this country is that gold is a barbarous relic and the stock markets are roaring higher, as you note, and the reason for that is, and this is a fact, central banks are buying S&P futures to drive markets higher while they are simultaneously working in collaboration to suppress gold and silver prices. That's a fact. So it's pretty interesting to stand back at a 30,000-foot view and look at the facts and realize that despite the fact that they're trying to crush the paper prices of gold and silver, gold's still up 0.5% when priced in dollars this year, and that's only because the dollar has been surging. So why do we care about this? Why do we still talk about precious metals at this point? Well, as you noted recently in an article, Mark, U.S. debt has surpassed the $18 trillion mark, surging 70% higher in this quote-unquote recovery under Barack Obama. It's all an illusion of debt. Everything they're doing to create this recovery, a roaring economy, a roaring stock market, is an illusion of bankster debt, period. Do you agree?
I do, absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I was shocked by when I went into Google News to see how because I thought when we hit 18 trillion debt, I thought that could be, a penny dropping for people. And I thought some of the media might say, oh, well, wow, maybe the recovery isn't as strong as we thought. And there'll be some interesting coverage of this. But it was barely covered at all. I mean, things have been quite Orwellian for a while, but I actually think it's becoming more Orwellian. And it's amazing that you could hit the 18 trillion number in terms of total government debt. Sorry, not total government debt. That's just the national government debt. It doesn't include the unfunded liabilities, which are between 100 trillion and 200 trillion. So it's just incredible that this number would be hit. It's increased roughly 1 trillion per year during the Obama presidency, this so-called recovery, and it is pure propaganda, this recovery. You can't have recovery if your balance sheet of your nation is deteriorating in a massive way, which is what is happening, and that there is no reduction in debt, either the nominal national debt or else the unfunded liabilities, so it makes a complete mockery of this so-called recovery meme that goes on, and there's lots of other data points recently that suggest that recovery is much more fragile, and obviously a lot of the statistics are hedonically adjusted and they're tweaked and manipulated to suggest that there is a recovery. But I think you have to question that. And we didn't look at it. I was going to look at it again in the blog during the week, but we looked at it recently. It's just, I think people get so jaded and so bombarded with numbers and they're almost blasé by a trillion. They don't realize how big a trillion is. I mean, a trillion is 1,000 billion, but they don't even realize how big a billion is, because a billion is 1,000 million. And they don't know how big that is. And you have to put it in terms of, if you put it in terms of time, that's a good way for people to understand it. So I actually pulled up the blog we did on it previously. 1 billion seconds ago was 1967. Now, it was nearly 50 years ago. Sorry, 40? Yeah, nearly 50 years ago. It was 1 billion seconds ago. So that's how big 1 billion is. 1 billion minutes ago, Jesus Christ was alive. Back in Bethlehem and Jerusalem. That's 1 billion minutes ago. So that's 2014 years ago. 1 billion hours ago, our ancestors were in the Stone Age. So that's 1 billion. It's a huge number. And the US debt increased by 1 trillion in 1 year.
And that's 1,000 billion. You're exactly right. The numbers are so large, no one can get their arms around them at this point. And forget talking to your friends, neighbors, and colleagues about the quadrillion-dollar derivatives market. I've often said, and Rory and I and other guests have talked about the fact that I think, and I believe firmly, that what's going on behind the scenes is far scarier and far more dire than any of us can possibly imagine, as these banksters need to reconcile these numbers on a daily basis, when really, in fact, they're unreconcilable, even mentally, when you just consider the magnitude of the numbers. Can you even imagine having to be the DTCC and reconcile these trades these high-frequency trades at the end of every day? It's absolutely impossible, and it's not nutty to say that. It just is true. It's even with the help and assistance of machines and computers, it's impossible to reconcile all of these trades, because at the end of every day in a fair and honest market, at the end of the 3-day DTCC settlement period, the paper certificates need to transfer to the new rightful owner. That's not happening. How can that possibly happen when you're talking about trillions of trades in a year? Now, Rory, I know you've got some great questions prepared for Mark, so I want you to feel free to jump in at any point. But why don't we talk briefly about the Swiss gold referendum vote, Rory, before we throw to you, because a vote against sovereignty and freedom is what this was, and as Peter Schiff has summarized it, the Swiss have hitched their wagon to the euro, a thought they once firmly rejected by refusing to join the European Union, but they've turned their back on their own currency. But as you put it, Mark, and I agree, demand from Russia, India, and China is far more important. And as I said before the referendum vote even occurred, it doesn't matter what they do because we know the truth. And the truth is central banks and nation states around the world are hoarding gold and acquiring it as fast as they can. What do you make of the Swiss gold referendum vote? Do we have this right? It really doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Swiss gold referendum, if they had voted yes, which was unlikely from day one, because the scale of the propaganda war that was going to go on was going to be so huge, and indeed it turned out to be that it was unlikely. But at one stage, the polls were showing that there was a chance, But for us, that was always going to be icing on the cake, and that was going to be a victory in terms of, I suppose, the monetary system and a victory for sound money, and indeed a victory for the Swiss people. And I suppose it would be, I suppose there's been a war on gold for years, and this is another victory for the current incumbents, the international monetary authorities, and they've secured another victory, and it's as you suggest, and Peter Schiff suggested, it is the debt of the Swiss franc as a I suppose as a sound currency and as a hard currency. But again, if they had won that vote for us and for the rest of the world, it would have been icing on the cake, because it would have resulted in extra demand from their central bank over a period of months and years. And indeed, I think that would have emboldened other central banks to, particularly Western central banks, potentially to buy gold. So it would have been an added bullish factor. But the existing factors are so bullish already, that it was just an added plus in effect, and those factors are, it's Russian demand, particularly from the Russian central bank, which is very, very large, and I think potentially will get much, much larger, because it's important to realize it's very large in tonnage terms, but in terms of dollar terms and in terms of billions of dollars, and we're just talking about the billions and trillions of dollars sloshing around the financial system and the levels of debt, but the Russian demand is actually quite small, as is the Indian demand, as is the Chinese demand. I mean, the Chinese demand, Indian demand is looking at about 1,000 tons again this year. Chinese demand is looking about 2,000 tons. The run rate of withdrawals in the Shanghai Gold Exchange are about 50 tons a week again, so we're heading for 2,000 tons there again. But in dollar terms, it's quite small, vis-a-vis stock markets. The capitalization of global stock markets is about 50 trillion. Bond markets is about 50 trillion. Sorry, I think heading about 60 trillion now. We're about 50 trillion about a year, 2 years ago, and we're going pretty parabolic on that as well. Currency markets absolutely huge, and you alluded to quadrillion that's out there in terms of derivatives,
Yeah, well, now let me jump in and just say, though, because we are all on the same page here, and Rory, feel free to jump in, but that is the point. Right? The point is that the illusionary monetary wealth system that exists in ones and zeros on computers and stock markets and certificates that have not successfully traded to the hands that actually own them, it is literally an illusion. So when we talk about even the small gold market, the several thousand tons a year being acquired by these central banks and nation states, that's the real wealth. That's the physical, tangible, actual wealth that represents human production and labor, hours of labor spent, right? That's the tangible wealth our forefathers cherished. This system, which has robbed us of that, and all the trillions and quadrillions that we've been talking about, is nothing more than an illusion in computers. And once that illusion fails, once that system implodes, imagine what the real tangible wealth it will be worth for those who hold it in their hands. We've been talking about it for a long time. But the story hasn't changed. The chickens are going to come home to roost when this illusionary system implodes.
Well, and there's more and more people, more and more countries, I should say, that are stepping up and saying, well, maybe we want our gold.
That's right.
I mean, we just found out yesterday, Belgium
That's right,
investigating to repatriate all gold reserves. We found out a few weeks ago that France is considering it. we know what happened with the Swiss repatriation movement or the Gold Initiative, and I see
And the
the Gold
Dutch did it as
Initiative
well, yeah.
and the Dutch receiving 122 and a half tons, a couple of weeks ago.
But I wanted to ask you guys about that. That's one of my questions for you guys. Is that real? Do you think that actually happened? How did the Dutch get 122 tons of gold, Mark, when the Germans couldn't even get what? What did they get first year? 5 tons out of the gold they want back from the New York Fed? How in the hell did the Dutch get 122 tons secretly and nobody knew about it until they got it back? I don't buy that story. There's something fishy.
Yeah, there's something fishy is the way to put it, yeah. And a lot of people are asking questions and just trying to figure out how could that happen, because the Germans are obviously as a nation more powerful than the Dutch, and therefore you would assume that they would be able to bring the powers that they have in terms of diplomacy and on the international stage. If they really want to bring their gold home, then why is it that the Dutch suddenly in a very short period of time were able to bring all their gold home, whereas the Germans are only be able to bring home a few tons every single month? So it is very peculiar. One theory is, and this of all the theories I've heard, this rings the most true to me, and that is that they were possibly they were allowed to bring their gold home on the basis that they then leased that gold back into the marketplace. Mm-hmm. So there is a possibility that the 122 tons went back to Amsterdam, but subsequently those 122 tons were leased back into the marketplace by the bullion banks. So it could in effect the tool of manipulation, the tool of suppression of the gold price, of creating this vast, huge extra supply of gold that's actually non-existent. It's just funny accounting tricks. That may have been allowed to go on, and therefore they may have been allowed to take the 122 tons back to Amsterdam. And that, that does ring true to me, given what's happened in the gold market in recent months and years.
Yeah, and one of my pet theories is that they played ball on the downing of MH17 in the cover-up of the actual investigation. They're not releasing the data, and the Dutch played a key role in the investigation of that downing of that airliner, the Malaysian airliner, which of course was squarely pinned on the shoulders of Putin and Russia, and we know that to be false. That was a false flag operation, and the facts are largely in, though the Mockingbird mainstream media refuses to address it or talk about it. So I do find it fascinating that the Dutch played ball on that investigation with the globalists and now have been rewarded with reportedly 122 tons of gold. Rory, I don't want to steal your thunder, buddy. We got 10 more minutes here with Mark.
There were some comments made recently by a very respected analyst and economist, and his theory on the German gold repatriation, that the reason that they're not going to ever get their gold back, and this makes sense to me, this is what I believe. When I heard this and read this, it's like, oh my goodness, that the Germans are not ever going to get their gold back because of the natural relationship that exists between Russia and Germany, and that if the Germans were able to get the 680 tons that is outside that the Federal Reserve has, that they would be able to reintroduce a gold-back mark, and that would be work in concert with a gold-backed ruble, and that would essentially blow up NATO financially. That would blow up the euro. It would blow up Europe, and so that the Germans will never get their gold back. And what do you think about that, Mark?
Yeah, I think it's another interesting theory, and it rings true to an extent. Because, if the Germans did have the gold, it gives them a lot more independence. It's for nation states as it is for individuals, and they would be more powerful. The old adage, the golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules. And the analyst or the economist, I mean, he's definitely right. There's a historical relationship there throughout the years. That relationship broke down, obviously, in World War II, and what happened with the Nazis, and then the rise of communism and the Cold War. But there is still, I suppose, an affinity there, and the relationships were very, very strong in recent months and years since the end of the Cold War and the Iron Curtain coming down. Obviously, we've seen the merger of West Germany and East Germany, and that's a template for wider relationships, because obviously those West Germany and East Germany were at each other's throats at one stage, and a lot of German industrialists and business people do see a future with the Eurasia, as a key sort of geopolitical region in effect, and at one stage was talk that the Russians may even join the euro, so. Yeah, yeah, it's very difficult to tell, but that does ring true to me. If the neocons and neoconservatives want to, they've clearly decided that they are going to demonize Russia, and they want to use Russia, basically do what they've done in terms of the Islamic world to have this evil empire and the Reds under the bed, and they want this massive perceived threat so they can control their own populations and I suppose do the crazy military machinations that they're doing in terms of trying to maintain military hegemony, and indeed economic hegemony. So,
well, if I may, let me just jump in though and back
possible,
you. Yeah, let me just jump in and support what you're saying here about this total madness. Now, Rory, to your point, if the Germans could get their gold back and that would wreck NATO financially somehow, that would be a blessing to humanity, because as Ron Paul just warned the other day, reckless Congress just declared war on Russia, and it's because the U.S. House passed what Ron Paul considers to be one of the most insidious, dangerous pieces of legislation ever, Resolution 758, which was billed as a resolution strongly condemning the actions of the Russian Federation under President Vladimir Putin, which has carried out a policy of aggression against neighboring countries aimed at political and economic domination. In fact, the bill was 16 pages of war propaganda, as Ron Paul notes, that should have made even neocons blush if they were capable of such a thing, and only 10 Congress critters voted against it. These people are warmongering madmen, and they are literally, in defense of this dollar and this globalist debt-based evil system, they are going to take us gleefully dancing into World War III if somehow the American people don't rein them in. And I don't know how we're going to do it, but I don't know. I just wanted to share that with you guys because it's very discouraging. We're literally moving towards the brink of World War III, even though most Americans are woefully unaware.
Well, Dancing with the Stars is on.
That's true. And $5 footlongs are still available.
$5 footlongs are still available with your EBT card.
That's right. Well, you know what? I think we need to do these calls with Marco Byrne, the research director, head of research at goldcore.com, far more often than we do, because, Mark, you're just such a wonderful source for information. We post your blog entries every single day at SGT Report, and, of course, people can read them directly at your website. Can you directly at your website? Can you tell them how to do that?
Sorry, how do they get the blog?
Yeah, tell folks how they can get right to you directly.
It's Goldcore, GOLDCORE.com, and there you'll see the blog up the top of the page. Yeah, we do a free blog that's available to everybody. It goes out on a daily basis, and it's both the blog itself, but also we pick out 4 or 5 key news items and 4 or 5 commentary items, and sometimes we've picked up on the good stuff that you guys are doing and on Daily Coin and that, and so they can sign up and they can get that into their inbox on a daily basis, and they can just go to, if they just want to go to the website, they can find the blog there, and we try to just look at the big developing news stories, because a lot of them just aren't being covered, and when they are covered, this doesn't seem, the context isn't there, which is obviously important. The context to all these things is decisive, and it's amazing the just how poorly things are being covered, and this leads to a lack of knowledge and a lack of awareness of the risks that are out there, and just on that, I mean, what we do is we sell gold and silver, and we think that's absolutely vital that everybody owns gold and silver. They have it in their possession. And then certain amounts, we do believe there's plan B and also plan C, that you should have some overseas as well, just in the event of worst case scenarios. It's nice to have a little bit overseas that you can go abroad and start again, as people have done throughout history. That is the great value of gold, but it's also not about having gold is a great thing, and having silver coins and bars, but I also think that's important, given the risks that you outlined, that where you live, and making sure that you have family, you have community, you have good neighbors. I think that's going to be as important as gold and silver in the coming months and years, and having access to. I don't think you want to be in cities if some of the worst case scenarios that you outlined come to pass, which is quite possible. I think you need to be in a community where people know know each other, and they look out for each other, and there's markets, there's farmers markets, there's ways to look after your family and your friends, so I think that's something we don't tend to be, with all the propaganda that's out there. I think people become disempowered because there's so much fear out there. So it's important people sort of, there's so many things that we can do within our own that are within our own control, and I think we need to start thinking about that, because I think that's going to be important in 2015.
Yeah, 2015 and beyond, absolutely. And the slogan for SGT Report is the corporate propaganda antidote. And as you mentioned, all of these issues are being covered so poorly and inadequately by the mainstream mockingbird media, and that's why we exist. The slogan for SGT Report certainly applies to everybody in the alternative media who's trying day in and day out to get the truth out. Rory's doing a great job over there at Daily Coin, and certainly you're doing a wonderful job as well at goldcore.com. Our guest has been Marco Byrne, Head of Research for Goldcore. Mark, thank you so much for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on the SGT Report, Sean. It's always a pleasure, and keep up the great work.
Well, thank you so much. And Rory, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Guys, thanks.
Rory. Have a great Christmas, guys.
Have a Merry Christmas, and everyone listening also have a Merry Christmas. We very much appreciate you. Thanks for checking us out at sgtreport.com and thelibertymill.com, where truth shall prevail. Have a great week, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, you too.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Pleasure, yeah. Thanks a million.